The winter storm had come down from the mountains without warning, covering Thomas Harper's ranch in thick white snow. He stood on his porch that gray afternoon, watching the snowflakes fall like tiny feathers from the heavy sky. The wind howled through the valley, bending the bare trees and piling drifts against the fence posts. Thomas was a rancher now, having expanded his grandfather's old farm into a successful cattle operation. At 35 years old, he had built a good life for himself on this land. The farmhouse had been restored and enlarged. The barns were sturdy and warm. His herd was healthy and strong. But on days like this, when the wind screamed and the world turned white, even a prosperous ranch could feel lonely. His dog, a beagle mix named Copper, stood beside him on the porch, whining softly. The animal's ears were perked forward, focused on something Thomas could not see. "What is it, boy?" Thomas asked, touching the dog's head gently. Copper barked once, sharp and urgent, then leaped off the porch and ran into the snow. Thomas grabbed his heavy coat and followed, calling after the dog. But Copper was already disappearing into the storm, heading toward the hills at the eastern edge of the property. Thomas trudged through the deepening snow, his boots sinking with each step. The cold bit at his face and hands. He could barely see 10 feet ahead through the swirling white. But he could hear Copper barking, the sound distant and insistent. He found the dog at the base of a rocky outcrop, near the remains of an old wagon wheel that had been there since his grandfather's time. But Copper was not alone. There was someone lying in the snow. Thomas's heart jumped. He ran forward and dropped to his knees beside the figure. It was a woman, young, maybe in her late 20s. She wore traditional Cherokee clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and a fringed shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her long black hair was braided and dusted with snow. Her eyes were closed and her face was pale and still. "Ma'am," Thomas said urgently, touching her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She did not respond. Her breathing was shallow and slow. Thomas knew immediately that she was in serious danger. He could not tell how long she had been out here, but in this weather, it would not take long for hypothermia to kill her. Without hesitation, Thomas lifted the woman into his arms. She was light, too light, as if she had not eaten properly in days. He carried her as quickly as he could through the storm, back toward the warmth and safety of his house. Copper ran ahead, breaking a path through the snow. Inside, Thomas laid the woman on the couch near the fireplace. He built up the fire until it roared, filling the room with heat and light. Then he covered her with every blanket he could find. Her clothes were wet with melted snow, and he knew he should change them, but propriety held him back. Instead, he wrapped her more tightly and waited, watching her face for any sign of consciousness. Slowly, color began to return to her cheeks. Her breathing deepened. After what felt like hours, her eyes fluttered open. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with confusion and fear. "It's okay," Thomas said softly, keeping his distance so she would not feel threatened. "You're safe. I found you in the snow. You're at my ranch now." The woman looked around the room, taking in the fire, the blankets, the beams of the restored farmhouse. Then her eyes returned to Thomas's face. She studied him carefully, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. "What's your name?" Thomas asked gently. "Amma," she whispered. Her voice was rough and weak. "My name is Amma. I'm Thomas Harper. This is my land. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to." Amma closed her eyes again, exhausted. Thomas sat in a chair across from her, keeping watch. Copper curled up on the floor nearby, his chin resting on his paws. Over the next few days, as the storm continued to rage outside, Amma slowly regained her strength. Thomas prepared simple meals, soup, bread, hot tea, and brought them to her. At first she ate very little, but gradually her appetite returned. She remained quiet, speaking only when necessary, and Thomas did not press her for information. On the third day, when the storm finally broke and pale sunlight struggled through the clouds, Amma was strong enough to sit up on her own. Thomas found her looking out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, standing beside her. "Yes," Amma replied. "But also dangerous." Thomas nodded. "Can I ask what you were doing out there?" "In the storm?" Amma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with grief. "I was dying," she said simply. "I wanted to die." Thomas felt his chest tighten. He waited, giving her space to continue if she chose to. "My husband passed away 3 months ago," Amma said. "He was a good man. We had a small cabin in the hills not far from here. We lived simply, growing what we needed, hunting, making crafts to sell in town. It was a good life." She paused, her fingers touching the turquoise beads around her neck. "But then he got sick. Pneumonia. By the time we got him to a doctor, it was too late. He died in 2 days. I'm so sorry," Thomas said quietly. "After he was gone, I couldn't stay in our cabin," Amma continued. "Everything there reminded me of him. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I felt like I was already a ghost. So when the storm came, I walked into it. I thought it would be peaceful, to just fall asleep in the snow and not wake up." Thomas understood pain. He understood loss. He had read his grandfather's letters, had felt the weight of regret and isolation that could crush a person's spirit, but he also understood something else, that sometimes survival came not from strength but from the simple intervention of grace. "I'm glad you're alive," Thomas said. "I'm glad Copper found you." Amma looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me." "Because every life matters," Thomas replied. "And because I think you have more to offer this world than you realize." Over the following weeks, Amma stayed at the ranch. At first, it was simply because she had nowhere else to go and was still too weak to travel. But as her physical strength returned, something else began to heal as well. Her spirit. She began helping Thomas with small tasks around the house. She cooked traditional meals that filled the farmhouse with rich, unfamiliar aromas. She repaired torn clothing with stitches so small and perfect, they were almost invisible. She told Thomas stories about her people, about their history and traditions, about the land they had lived on for generations before it was taken away. Thomas listened and learned. He discovered that Amma was incredibly skilled. She knew how to work with leather, how to identify medicinal plants, how to track animals through the forest. She knew songs and prayers that had been passed down through her family for centuries. She carried a wisdom that came from a culture much older than his own. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Thomas asked the question he had been wondering about for weeks. "What will you do now?" he said, "when spring comes?" Amma looked into the flames, her face thoughtful. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no family left. No home to return to." Thomas took a breath. "You could stay here," he said carefully. "Not as a guest. As a partner. This ranch needs your skills. I've been trying to raise cattle, but the land could support more. You could teach me about the plants that grow here, about living in harmony with this place instead of just working it. And in return, you'd have a home, a purpose." Amma turned to look at him, surprise in her eyes. "Why would you offer me this?" "Because you saved my life too," Thomas said. "Not from a storm, but from loneliness. From thinking that success was just about owning land and raising cattle. You've reminded me that there's more to life than that." Tears gathered in Amma's eyes, but she smiled. "I think my husband would have liked you," she said softly. "I hope so," Thomas replied. As winter gave way to spring, Amma became a permanent part of the ranch. She created a garden of medicinal herbs and native plants. She taught Thomas about sustainable harvesting, about respecting the land and taking only what was needed. She brought beauty to the farmhouse with her crafts, beaded decorations, woven baskets, paintings that captured the spirit of the hills. The relationship between them remained respectful and appropriate. They were partners, friends, two people who had found in each other a reason to keep living. Amma honored her late husband's memory while slowly building a new life. Thomas learned from her wisdom while offering her safety and stability. Copper, the dog who had found Amma in the snow, became her constant companion. She would often sit on the porch in the evenings, the dog at her feet, looking out at the land that had almost claimed her life but had instead given her a new one. Thomas understood now that wealth was not measured only in acres or cattle. True richness came from connection, from learning, from giving someone a second chance when they needed it most. The storm had brought Amma to his door, and in saving her life, he had enriched his own immeasurably. The hills that had witnessed her despair now watched her healing. And Thomas Harper, the rancher who had once felt the ache of isolation, had found in an unexpected friendship the fulfillment he had been seeking all along.